All right, Saagar, what's on your radar?
Well, on Thursday, we sought to digest the fact that the unemployment rate in America somehow ticked down to 13.3%, an unexpected fall that stunned Wall Street economists. Markets shot up. Wall Street analysts, they're doing backflips about the state of the economy. President Trump even held a Rose Garden press conference, and the professional GOP breathed a major sigh of relief. I should mention that when the jobs report came out on Friday, it even included a note. It later included a note saying that there was a major error, indicating that the unemployment rate should be higher than 13.3%, more likely 16.3% for May. But the Bureau of Labor Statistics said it was working to fix the problem and are, quote, investigating why this miscalculation error continues to occur. Now, the economy is coming back, these people thought, and even better, they didn't have to spend any more money to alleviate worker suffering. Art Laffer and Stephen Moore, two long discredited economists who for some reason are playing an integral role in crafting the White House response to the crisis, immediately chimed in. Moore told friend of the show Jeffrey Stein of the Washington Post the jobs numbers, quote, take a lot of wind out of the sails of any phase 4. We don't need it now, adding, there's no reason to have a major spending bill. The sense of urgent crisis is very greatly dissipating by this report. Laffer chimed in with something that can only be described as a parody, saying, quote, imagine there's two farmers on an island and nothing else. One gets unemployment. Who pays for it? The other farmer. That's economics. Straight, simple, intuitive, and true. That's why government spending doesn't work. End quote. That is such a colossally stupid statement, I don't really know where to begin. My favorite reply to that tweet was, well, the employed farmer will go out of business because the unemployed farmer can't buy his crops. So then what? Laffer and Moore's clownish responses, they crystallize the deep sickness which pervades the Republican Party in 2020. They are so ideologically committed to not spending money, they would rather millions be destitute, have mass small business failure, and lose the 2020 election, sacrificing any of the cultural ground that they pretend to care about. Benji Sarlin over at NBC News observed just how strange of a dynamic it is for the opposition party to literally beg the governing party to spend trillions of dollars to save the economy in an election year, and how that the governing party says, no thanks. As Ross Douthat puts it, quote, it is strong evidence against the proposition that the congressional GOP simply follows a cynical Keynesianism for me and not for thee approach to policy. And it is also strong evidence that the congressional GOP is a ship of fools. A deeper look at the jobs report reveals dire news. The gains in employment are mostly restaurant workers coming back in part to reopening businesses across the nation. Worse, buried in the report is that the number of permanent job losses are rising, a sign that maybe businesses who haven't furloughed workers but are closed altogether, regardless of whether things are open or not. The higher that number ticks up, the more the disaster scenario for the GOP is clearer every day. 13.3% may look fine now, but 6 months from now, if it's still sitting around 10%, who do you think is going to take that blame? 10% is the same number as the Great Recession. Already, the nation is turning against President Trump and Republicans. A Real Clear Politics average, which we covered earlier on the show, at every battleground state in this current moment has Biden up in every single one. That's not a joke. The smallest polling margin is 0.8 for a lead in Biden in North Carolina, a state that Trump won by 4 points last time around. The state Senate races are even worse. Tight margins in Montana, Kansas, and Iowa. Last week, Crystal and I covered a poll noting that nearly 70% of the country believes we are on the wrong track. Combine that with mass unemployment and the explicit political choice by many of these Senate Republicans to simply spend more money to keep businesses afloat and decide against that, you are looking at possibly one of the most historic defeats for the GOP in modern history. And for too long, they have coasted to victories on culture wars, while the public holds its nose at their economic policy. But when economic destruction is the center point of their lives, then they may be willing to give ground on culture to literally be able to work again. Sacrificing electoral victory at the altar of free market fundamentalism is profoundly immoral if the stakes really are as high as they claim. And I wish I could even say that a loss would teach them a lesson and move towards better economic policy. But the sad truth is it won't. All the think tank scholars working on behalf of their billionaire donors will have booming business under Joe Biden. The senators don't actually care about their constituents as long as a board seat at Raytheon or some private equity giant awaits them. And they don't actually care about victory because that requires action when all they're really good at is taking care of many of their corporate sponsors. I mean, can you imagine, Chris? I thought that Benji Sarlin thing was such a great observation, which is that you have the opposition party, Pelosi and others, being like, please spend trillions of dollars to save the economy, of which would credit you. And they're like, no, we're good. Don't worry about it.
We're good here.
And how good was the Stephen Moore thing? The whole, he even said, this shows that we have V-shaped recovery. We have a V-shaped economic recovery because we have the worst unemployment. This is the worst unemployment still since the Great Depression, even with the good jobs report. And the stock market goes up. Everyone's like, oh, great, problem solved here.
Well, and it's not just, Ross's tweet was also really smart and really insightful. It's not just that they don't ideologically are committed to not spending money on small businesses, on American workers. It's also, look, they are willing to spend money on things like the military. That doesn't factor into their calculations, but there is an ideological commitment that goes beyond political calculation, to your point, that goes against spending any money that would help them in their reelection chances and, more importantly, would help American workers, help people be able to get back on their feet, help people feel like they're going to be okay, like their jobs are going to come back, like we are going to be able to get back to normal, whatever that is going to be moving forward. It really is quite a remarkable dynamic. And I think one of the things I'm curious to hear your thoughts on is, let's say that Trump loses in a landslide, which is looking entirely likely right now. A covered CNN poll has him down 14 points. Lose the Senate. It's not like they're going to learn the right lessons.
Oh, no.
You have a whole infrastructure in this town. I mean, we saw the same thing on the Democratic side that will launch into gear with their media allies to paint the problem as, oh, we abandoned our holy commitment to free trade, right? That was the real problem. We weren't pro-business enough. We weren't consistent with our long-held economic conservative values, and that's the real reason why we lost. And so rather than going back and saying, okay, we screwed up in this area, we screwed up in that area, we needed to actually deliver for American workers, not just talk about delivering for American workers, they'll go right back to the sort of free market fundamentalism that Oren Cass talks about on the show.
That's exactly what it is. Look, I think people need to understand how much the professional GOP hate Trump's guts. They don't like him. Like, there was even a New York Times piece that came out over the weekend of sitting Republican senators who had told Senator Chris Coons, that they would not vote for him privately. And one of them even said he was considering not voting for him on background to the New York Times. People like me, other people, Steve Bannon, they hate us so much because all they want to do, what they're going to do is, if there's a landslide loss, they're going to say, see this national populism stuff? We tried.
Or say it was the China trade war.
It was the China trade war. What American voters really rejected was the idea that we shouldn't have better trade with China, not rejected the idea that it was your economic policy, which you pushed into the White House and pushed in the Senate Republicans, which actually got you to lose the office. They're going to point at all that stuff and say, look, we tried it, right? Complete failure. And they're going to go right back to neocon foreign intervention. They're going to go right back to their same tax cut ideology, tax cuts 2.0. And then they're going to give rhetorical service to their working class base and say, no, we got you on the culture front. The other side are crazy. They're coming for you and all that. Just stay put. That's what they're going to do. And they're just going to keep losing elections over and over again, because this is something that's so important to understand. They don't want to win, because losing is much easier for them. The think tanks who raise all this money from donors and from envelopes and stuff, they got all these boomers out there who they can just send stuff to and be like, please send in $5 so we can defund Obamacare. They have no intention of ever defunding Obamacare or any of this other stuff. They just want your $5. Well, and so these grandmas and all these other people keep spending money in the mail. And it's terrible because they're being exploited. Yeah. They're legitimately being exploited. And the people here are sitting pretty, living large. And that's exactly what they're going to do if Trump goes down in a landslide. They will not learn any of the correct lessons. They'll start painting, they'll go after Biden on, deficit spending.
No, I mean, look, a Biden administration is like the easiest game in town for them. They know exactly how to run that playbook. No problem whatsoever. Nothing was better for business, for Fox News, for all for everybody in this town than the Obama presidency. And the Obamacare thing is actually the perfect example. I mean, let's keep in mind what Obamacare actually was. It was this very corporate friendly. It was Mitt Romney's healthcare plan, right? Instituted at the national level. This very centrist thing, which he did because he had a fantasy that Republicans were going to cooperate with him, which obviously never happened. Well, they galvanized all their forces of opposition against it, voted to repeal it how many times? Let's get rid of it. We've got our own great ideas. We never really heard much about what those great ideas actually were, but the rhetoric was incredibly effective. It was very effective. That's why they won in 2010. And then when they actually get power, they're like the dog that caught the car. They don't know what to do. They offer something that's a total mess. It goes down in flames. And that's a perfect example, though, of it was much easier and better for many of the people in this town on the Republican side of the aisle to be out of power and just be able to lob rhetorical bombs and not have to actually do anything, not have to actually deliver for anyone. So, yeah, I think you're right. I think there are a lot of people who are pretty comfortable with, if Trump loses. There are a lot of Republicans who are pretty comfortable with if Trump loses. They're not going to have to answer for his tweets anymore. They're not going to have to answer for the Insurrection Act and the other things that he does that are outlandish anymore. And it'll be a nice, safe space for them.
They don't have to do anything.
Biden presidency.
They don't want to do anything. That's the truth. They're nihilists. They have perfectly fine lives here because they're making a ton of money off of other well-intentioned people who really believe or want their interests protected. They don't actually want to protect your interests. I mean, they had 7 years to come up with an Obamacare plan. 7 years, and they couldn't do it. I mean, over and over and over again on every single one of these things. The only thing they were able to deliver on, Tax Cuts and Jobs Act, of course.
Yeah, right? That they had ready to go.
Ready to go. It's so
Or
telling.
the coronavirus response where, Boeing had their custom legislation ready to roll out right away, not a problem. And they jump to their needs because that's where their next paycheck's going to come from.
There you go. All right, I'm looking forward to your radar next, Crystal.